All right, let's explore the thinking of Jacques Fresco and the society he'd like to see.
The reason we emphasize machines and technology is to free man, to pursue the higher things. Machines ought to do the filthy, repetitious, or the boring jobs. It would take 10 years to change the surface of the earth. To save our environment, our stupidity, our conflict, we've got to reorganize our way of thinking and reconsider our social aims. We must put our mind to this as we do to put a man on the moon.
The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds, our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. From ourselves.
The Venus Project is a veritable blueprint for the genesis of a new world civilization based on human concern and environmental reclamation. It proposes a holistic social design in which automation and technology will be intelligently integrated to maximize the quality of life rather than simply profits.
Undesirable behaviors are products of long exposure to detrimental environments. If we wish to surpass the limitations of our present-day society, such as war, hunger, poverty, and bigotry, we need to make changes and arrange society very differently. Most of our problems today are technical, but we still look for solutions through political means in a monetary system.
We have the resources. Money is an interference because it limits our ability and it limits our dreams.
Modern society has access to highly advanced technologies and can make available food, clothing, housing, medical care, a relevant educational system, and at the same time develop a limitless supply of renewable, clean energy such as geothermal, tidal, solar, wind, and more.
The solutions lie in the intelligent and humane application of science and technology and more appropriate resource management in order to supply goods and services to everyone equitably, enabling the entire global population a very high standard of living.
We don't have enough money to accomplish this, but we do have enough resources. If we initiate what Jacques Fresco calls a resource-based economy, this is where all goods and services are available to everyone without money, credit, barter, or servitude of any kind. For this to be attained, all resources must be declared as the common heritage of all the Earth's people.
Imagine the possibilities of an unprecedented mobilization of scientific and technical alliances toward problem solving without the interference of money or politics to initiate global unification and restoration.
The Venus Project would start with a systems approach to city design, using highly effective construction methods, emphasizing the conservation of resources.
The first city would be a huge research center, making automated systems for the next city. It would be a place where we would disseminate information as to what sustainability really means for the future.
The aim of the city is to constantly maximize existing and future technologies, with the sole purpose of enhancing all human life and protecting the environment.
The society I'm talking about is global cooperation, where all the nations work toward improving the lot of humankind. Now, why do that? Because the smarter people are, the richer and more secure everybody is.
We have the tools at hand to design and build a future that is worthy of the human potential. It is imperative that we continue the process of social experimentation in order to transcend our present limitations and truly create the beginning of a civilized age.
Most religious people in America fully embrace science. So the argument that religion has some issue with science applies to a small fraction of those who declare that they are religious. They just happen to be a very vocal fraction, and so you get the impression that there's more of them than there actually is. It's actually the minority of religious people who reject science or feel threatened by it or want to sort of undo or restrict where science can go. The rest, are just fine with science, and has been that way ever since the beginning. And by the way, there's no tradition of scientists knocking down the door, the Sunday school door, telling the preacher what to teach. There's no tradition of scientists picketing outside of churches, nor should there be some emergent tradition of religious fundamentalists trying to change the curriculum in the science classroom. It's been a happy coexistence.
If the environment is structured, it produces what you would call ethical and moral behavior. But if you don't alter the environment, it'll keep producing what you got now. So the environment has to be changed. That means the schools, the things we learn, our language, all of these things have to be updated. I think that people will be ethical to the nature of the world. Ethical not because it says so in a book. They're ethical because it's better for them and better for society. So the new ethics is based upon the carrying capacity of the earth rather than my opinion. In the future, for example, if you said, there ought to be more kindness in the world and more cooperation, they would say, how do you do that? If you have nothing to offer, they say, why do you make noises? They would not accept that as anything sensible. Emotions are superfluous to the task. Your feelings in the future, all emotions will be translated to an action pattern. You'll do medical research on how to develop bones that are getting weaker, how to strengthen them, how to improve the health of people. When emotions are translated to deeds rather than this. Now, love will disappear in the future and be replaced by a newer definition called extensionality, meaning enhance one another's lives. But I love you are just empty words that manifest nothing. It's how people behave to one another that indicates love. There's another thing that's very dangerous, claiming to be aware or conscious. You hear that all the time, at least I'm conscious. Well, I usually meet with those people and I say, where is your liver? not sure. How fast is the blood moving through your veins and arteries? What area of the brain controls creativity? What area is responsible for emotions? What do you mean by consciousness? The human being on top of the Empire State Building can see a 3-foot ball, but a chicken hawk can see a dime and see whether it's heads or tails. The term used, consciousness or awareness, is limited to your senses. So we can never be conscious. We can grow in degrees and understand perhaps a little more about many more things, but we never can achieve consciousness because we don't see gamma rays, cosmic rays. We don't see all of those things without instrumentation. Religion has an old book with a lot of myths, packed with myths, and it doesn't change every year. Consider this. A scientist has a book on astronomy. Every year that book undergoes change. If you have a book on electronics that's 2 years old, it's obsolete. So they undergo change. But here's a minister with that one book under his arm, a real simplistic interpretation of the earth. And it caters to what people fear, what happens after death.
What happens now is that myth and superstition is pervasive, not because we don't have better ways of understanding things, but because people want to believe things that make them feel better.
Then they tell you in school that everything in nature has a purpose. You know, what's the purpose of life and all that. So they say the purpose of the eyebrows is to deflect sweat off to the side. That means there's a designer. Now what's the purpose of coughing and sneezing? To infect other people? They say the purpose of horns on an animal is to protect itself. So I said, what's the purpose of those horns? They say, that's for ramming other animals. I said, what if the horns go off to the side? Well, that's for keeping them off the side. What if they go back? That's to keep them off the back? No. Animals are born with every which way horn, and they learn how to use them.
People hope that there's some cosmic purpose to their life, but in fact, science, as far as we can tell, tells us there's no evidence that there's purpose to the universe. Does that mean there's no purpose to the universe? No, we can't prove it. It just said there's no evidence of a universe with purpose, and the universe effectively acts like it has no purpose. Now, should this depress us? In my opinion, no. Because what it means is that the purpose in our lives is the purpose we make.
We don't want people to have loyalty to corporations or a country. We want them to have loyalty to methodology and loyalty to invention, meaning to improve everything that exists, to make them better, smarter, faster, and make them available to all people. That's the kind of loyalty that's needed.
There's been a happy coexistence for centuries, and for that to change now would be unfortunate, because I've seen this happen in other nations and other states where the consequences are that you just basically recede back to the cave, because that's where you land when you undermine the scientific and technological innovations that come about when you're a properly trained scientist or technologist. Consider also that in America, 40% of American scientists are religious. So this notion that there's some, that if you're a scientist, you're an atheist, or if you're religious, you're not a scientist, that's just empirically false. It's an empirically false statement.
Probably not the right politically correct thing to say, but if you don't believe in God, I mean, really, you got to have an explanation for this. You just can't tell me this spun out of a gastrous ball, and then all of a sudden, then we were evolved from monkeys. Why we still got monkeys? It's too much open here. I just believe that, and if you don't believe that, then I don't like talking to you.
I say. Hey, I'm Dan Harris, and as a reporter who often covers issues of faith, I've met many evangelical Christians who are dead set against the theory of evolution. In fact, I've been down to the Creation Museum in Kentucky, where they have a big display that shows dinosaurs coexisting with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Now comes Dr. Francis Collins, who's a devout Christian and also a very serious scientist. In fact, he led the charge to map the human genome. And Dr. Francis Collins has a new mission, which is to take on his fellow believers on the issue of evolution. I have to imagine that some evangelicals get very upset with you.
I've certainly gotten some emails that curled my hair.
Really?
I've been called a wolf in sheep's clothing. I've been excommunicated a couple of times, although I'm not Catholic. I mean, people do get pretty upset about this.
How do you, as a devout Christian, square your scientific beliefs with what it says in Genesis?
I like the idea that God gave us two books. He gave us the book of God's words, the Bible, which I read every day and which I trust to give me great truth, but which in many ways has parts that I don't entirely understand. But that other book God gave us, the book of God's works, nature, which science allows us to uncover, is also an opportunity to learn about the nature of God, to worship, if you will, what God has given us, and to get a glimpse of God's mind when you discover something new about the universe. So how could that possibly be a conflict of truths?
Well, let me press you on that. I mean, the Genesis would leave us to believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old. And it would lead us to believe that God created two human beings, one out of the rib of the other. It's pretty explicit stuff.
We interpret it as explicit these days. It is not a textbook of science. It would not have suited God's purposes to lecture to his chosen people about radioactive decay and such things as DNA. What God was trying to teach us through those words is the nature of God and the nature of humans, and that comes through loud and clear.
As a believer and a scientist, how do you deal with some of the larger claims of Christianity, such as the resurrection?
The big question is, do you believe in God? And do you believe a God who is the creator and the author of everything we see? Once you've accepted the idea of a God who is the creator of all the laws of nature, the idea that God might, at unique moments in history, decide to invade the natural world and suspend those laws, doesn't become really a logical problem. And certainly the resurrection, as the most dramatic example of that, where God became man, walked this earth, was crucified, and then after death was resurrected, that for me is the cornerstone of my faith. And it doesn't present a real problem as a believer as long as I've already acknowledged that God is God.
Dr. Collins has just started up a new organization called BioLogos. That's a made-up word, but the goal of this organization is to try to bridge the gap between faith and science.
What science does provide for us is a great deal of information about the implications of the different options we have. So science helps us make better decisions by informing those decisions. And that's why it's a shame to turn away from science in the public arena.
Science is not an emotional way, not a wishful thinking way, but a rational way of seeing what the connections are. That's what science is about. How could that not apply to everything?
Well, the scientific method, quite simply, is a process by which you can try and distinguish what accurately describes the universe from what doesn't. It involves several steps. Often, of course, you make some supposition or prediction about what phenomena might result based on some theory. But then, most importantly, use empirical data, testing. You test your idea in a way that's falsifiable.
When they said to scientists, can you put a man on the moon? The answer was, I don't know. They go, how do you find out? Well, we have to put a guy in a centrifuge and spin him and see when he conks out. Then we know how fast the rocket can go. It can't start out at 7 miles a second. The guy would flatten out. After they try all these, then they say this is what we have to do to get a man on the moon.
You have to perform additional tests that are more selective to determine, in fact, how accurate your idea is. And science continues by the process of continual testing your ideas.
If you're going to get into nature, you're going to get into the rules by which nature operates. And it does operate by very specific rules, which means it's predictable. And so what's science? For me, it's more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking.